December 2, 1804, Notre Dame Cathedral. The air is thick with incense and the terrified silence of the European elite. The Pope reaches for the crown. But the man standing there doesn't wait. He snatches the crown. He places it on his own head. He is not a king by the grace of God. He is a king by the grace of his own bottomless insecurity. This is the ultimate FFU to a world that told him he was nothing. To understand the emperor, you must first understand the outsider. You must understand the boy who hated France before he owned it. Napoleon wasn't French. He was Corsican, a backwater islander born into a family of wannabe nobles who had just lost their independence to France. His father was a collaborator, a man who traded his dignity for French recognition. In young Napoleon's eyes, his father was a living personification of surrender. At age 9, he was sent to Brienne-le-Château, a scrawny kid with a thick Italian accent. He was the charity case in a school of blue bloods. They mocked his name. They mocked his poverty. They mocked his height. Though he was average for the time, he felt small. And that feeling is everything. This brings us to our first psychological anchor, Alfred Adler's Inferiority Complex. Adler argued that our primary drive isn't sex. It's the struggle for superiority. When an individual feels deeply inferior, they don't just try to be equal. They overcompensate. They seek fictional finalism, a state of godhood to mask the shame. While other boys were chasing girls or wine, Napoleon was chasing ghosts. He wasn't reading for pleasure. He was reading for a blueprint. If you can't belong to a society, you must conquer it. If they won't let you be a citizen, become their master. 1789. The war broke. The old hierarchy was decapitated. For a man with a hole in his soul, chaos isn't a threat, it's an opportunity. Most people see a revolution and see terror. Napoleon saw a vacuum. He realized that the mob doesn't want liberty, they want a father. He cleared the streets of Paris with a whiff of grape shot. He didn't care about the ideology. He cared about the order, his odor. This is the first cognitive reversal. We think Napoleon saved the revolution. In reality, he strangled it to birth himself. In Italy, he discovered his drug of choice glory. Not just winning, but the theater of winning. He was the first modern master of propaganda. He curated his own myth. He knew that the great is a label you have to scream until the world believes it. Every victory was a temporary fix for his childhood humiliation. But the Adlerian hole is a bottomless pit. You can't fill it with land. He went to Egypt to follow Alexander. He wanted to be an Eastern god king. Why? Because Europe was too small for his ego. He abandoned his army in Egypt when the tide turned. To a narcissist, people are just disposable assets in the service of the great work. He returned to Paris as a savior. But a savior of what? The French were tired of blood. Napoleon promised them stability. He nearly blew it. He wasn't a great orator. He was a man of action, paralyzed by the fear of being just a man in a room of politicians. He became first consul, then consul for life. The transformation was nearly complete. The outsider was now the ultimate insider. But here is the reversal. The more power he gained, the more he became obsessed with legitimacy. He married a widow of the old nobility, Josephine. He surrounded himself with the trappings of the very kings he had helped overthrow. Enter our second psychological concept, Kazimierz Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. Dabrowski argued that normal people are integrated into society, but exceptional people must shatter their own identity to rebuild a higher one. Napoleon's disintegration happened in Brienne. He rebuilt himself as a machine of logic. The Napoleonic Code was his attempt to replace the chaos of the father with the order of the son. He wanted to standardize everything. Weights, measures, laws, people. If the world was a machine he built, he could never be small again. Austerlitz, his masterpiece, 1805. He crushed the two great emperors of Europe. He was at the absolute peak of the human experience. At this moment, he believed he was a man of destiny. This is the hubris trap. Most leaders stop when they have enough. But for the overcompensating psyche, enough is a synonym for death. He loved Josephine, but he divorced her, not because he wanted to, but because she couldn't give him an imperial dynasty. Think about the coldness of that decision. He sacrificed the only person who truly knew the small boy to satisfy the great emperor. He married the daughter of the Habsburgs, the oldest, snubbiest dynasty in Europe. He was literally buying the legitimacy he felt he lacked. But the Habsburg blood couldn't wash away the Corsican shame. It only made him more desperate to prove he belonged. He began to believe his own propaganda. He thought he could command the weather, the economy, and the soul of nations. The continental system. His attempt to starve Britain. It was a macro-economic fantasy born of a man who couldn't handle being told no. Spain became the ulcer. A war he couldn't win because he didn't understand people who fought for nothing but their soil. 1812. The turning point. The great reversal. Why invade Russia? There was no strategic need. This is Ernest Becker's terror management theory. We build immortality projects, empires, art, legacies to shield us from the literal fact that we are going to die and be forgotten. Napoleon was 42. He was getting fat. His health was failing. The immortal emperor was facing the small boy's mortality. He led the largest army in human history into the mouth of the Russian winter, not for France, for his immortality project. He reached Moscow. It was empty. It was a trap. The Tsar wouldn't play his game. The Tsar wouldn't surrender. For the first time, his psychological overcompensation met a reality that didn't care about his God complex. The Grande Armée died in the snow. 500,000 men sacrificed to soothe the ego of a man who couldn't handle a minor diplomatic snub. He left them. Again, because the work was more important than the people. 1814. Paris falls. He is forced to abdicate. He tried to kill himself. The poison was old. It didn't work. He was exiled to Elba. A tiny kingdom for a man who wanted the world. The ultimate insult to his inferiority complex. He didn't stay. He couldn't. To stay on Elba was to admit he was just a man. He walked toward the soldiers. He opened his coat. If there is any among you who would kill his emperor, here I am. This was his greatest performance. He willed himself back into power through sheer psychological dominance. The 100 Days, a desperate, final gasp. He knew it would at last. Europe had had enough of the small boy's fire. Waterloo, June 18th, 1815. The final no from the world. When the old guard broke, his heart broke. The machine finally stopped. This time, the British took no chances. Say, Helena, a rock so remote it was effectively another planet. Here, the tragedy turns into a psychological autopsy. He spent his final years rewriting his life. He wasn't writing history. He was crafting a religion. He portrayed himself as the Messiah of liberty who was crucified by kings. He understood that even if he lost the war, he could win the psychological war for the future. He fought over titles. He fought over etiquette. Even at the end of the world, he needed to be the great. He was dying of stomach cancer, the same thing that killed his father. The father's legacy finally caught up with him. The man who tried to be everything but his father ended up dying exactly like him, the ultimate irony. A storm raged outside. His last words, France. L'armée, petite armée, Josephine. He died at 51. He had conquered more territory than anyone since Genghis Khan. Yet he died on a rock smaller than Corsica. Why are we still obsessed with him? Why does every dictator, CEO, and hustle culture guru look to him? Because Napoleon is the saint of the inferiority complex. He is proof that if you feel small enough, you can make the world tremble. History is littered with outsiders who burnt the house down because they weren't invited to the party. But Napoleon was different. He had a brain that matched his hunger. He was a genius fueled by a pathology. Today, he rests in a tomb of porphyry, surrounded by his victories. France loves him again. We have turned his trauma into a tourist attraction. We have romanticized a man who treated human lives like pixels in a video game. Was he a hero, or just a highly functioning victim of his own upbringing? He gave Europe the seeds of democracy, but he planted them in 5 million corpses. The Napoleon complex isn't about being short. It's about the smallness of the soul trying to occupy the greatness of the world. He was a meteor, brighter than the sun, and just as destructive. Ask yourself, what is your Corsica? What is the shame you are trying to outrun with your ambition? Because if you don't heal the boy, the man will set the world on fire just to stay warm. Power is the ultimate compensation, but in the end, the sea always takes the island. This has been a psychological autopsy of the little corporal. Subscribe. If you have the courage to look into the mirror of history. He said it. He failed it. Don't make the same mistake. See you in the next one.